Hi, welcome to Groundwork, a new podcast from McClanahan Corporation to talk about key material processing topics from agriculture to mining to material recycling. We'll discuss the best ways to process the raw materials that power the world, because if it's not grown, it's mined. Hi, my name is Nick Ford. I'm Director of Sales for aggregate crushing and screening with McClanahan. I have been with this company for about 7 years. We'll call it two tours. Was with a company called Universal Engineering out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, back in 2012 when McClanahan acquired that company, and went away for a little bit. And now I'm back on my second tour, and it's been about 2 years. Today, we've got a few others that will be joining us, Liam and Alistair. And guys, just give us a little bit about who you are and your backgrounds.
Okay, so my name's Alistair Forsyth. I am the Group President and Managing Director of Anaconda Equipment International. I've been in the industry for coming up on 20 years, I'm ashamed to say at this point. So started my career with one of the major three players in the portable tract crushing and screening industry market, which was a big global player. And then myself and my business partners started this brand before joining forces with McClanahan and an acquisition back in 2019. So much of my life is all things crushing and screening.
Yeah, hi, my name is Liam Holland. I'm the business line director for Rubble Crusher based in Leicestershire in the UK. I've been in the crushing and screening industry now for just over 17 years. A lot of that time was working with a company called CMB International, who worked with heavy-duty crushing and screening plant, mainly in static applications for aggregate quarries. Then back in 2022, with the acquisition of McClanahan, we then formed Rubble Crusher, and now taking what we know and understand from the heavy-duty crushing and screeners in providing a robust range of compact equipment.
Gotcha. I forgot to mention too, Alistair, you're not an old guy either. Right? I'm kind of up there with you. I've been in the industry about I think 18 years if you figure it all out. Mainly in the aggregate market. Also worked for a competitor in the track industry and kind of did a little everything, kind of like you do, Alistair. And recycling was probably 80-90% of the of what I got to do there, and then the rest being aggregate. So lots of hands-on, good and bad, as we all have been there. Anyways, guys, thank you for joining me today. And really today what we want to talk about is the best types of crushers for the C&D recycling industry. First of all, let's start. What is C&D waste? Guys, tell me what that means to you.
From our perspective, from a portable tract point of view, I mean, our world is 30 ton to 75 ton tract crushing and screening equipment. So when we talk about C&D crushing, which these days is becoming the mainstay for tract crushing, we're looking at concrete crushing, asphalt recycling, and any kind of usable aggregates coming from recycled products that are being processed through by crushing. So in its basic of terms, I mean, it transcends into much more than that, but essentially we're breaking down products that have been used in one application and recycling them through to be used in a new application, or parts of them to be used in a new application.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Or recycling. So, just a few things that come to my mind, in some of the different ways we recycle. Or we look at the concrete, like you said, to reuse some of those materials. The recycled asphalt or wrap, that sort of thing. And we've even got some experience with like the slag industry. Which who would ever thought, but it makes sense. And and then rubble, obviously you've got your building materials, your bricks, your that sort of thing. You'd like to recapture as much of that and reuse it if we can. Let's talk about the different types of plants or crushers or whatever. Now, Liam, I know you're on the compact side. What is a compact crusher? What do they offer?
Yeah, so the compact crushers typically classed up to maybe 20 ton size of machine. Again, focusing on recycling concrete, bricks, asphalt, softer natural rock, and typically can be used in both rural and urban areas, where access is maybe limited to sites, or where there's like lower volumes of materials we process, where you wouldn't necessarily bring in, the crusher from Alistair.
So these are small units, right? So you're talking maybe from 5 tons an hour up to 30 ton an hour?
Yeah, they're probably from 5 tons an hour up to 50 tons per hour.
50
and then
tons, okay.
Some of the bigger units maybe going up to around 80, approximately 100 tons per hour, but that's kind of where you're at.
Okay, I got you. Where do you typically, what kind of sites or site would you use this equipment in?
You'd use this in small-scale demolition projects. For example, if a contractor will be tearing down a building where access would be limited, again, or the volume of material to crush doesn't justify the use of a larger crusher. You can use it on landscaping jobs. So anywhere the landscape contractors will be excavating ground material, the rock that could be dug up, can then be crushed down and make base material. And then you've got skip hire companies, grab truck companies that bring in C&D materials back to site. Then they can process the material, crush it up, and sell it on as a usable aggregate.
Okay. And these must be highly mobile. You can take them from site to site fairly easy, I assume, since they're smaller.
Yeah, that's it. Yep. Being compact, they're super easy to transport, on the back of a truck, on the back of a gooseneck trailer. Really easy. A lot of them are now rubber tracked, so they can track across pavements, driveways, without causing any damage.
Okay. But do they have screens and, jaw crushers, impact crushers, cone crushers? What types of crushers?
Typically jaw crushers. We have screens as well, impact crushers. Not so much cone crushers on that scale at the minute. But yeah, typically you're talking jaw crushers and impactors.
Gotcha. Okay. And these are more self-contained type of units.
Yeah, self-contained units, like one-man operation, kept real simple to use on site. They're designed for the contractor market. So they're not heavy aggregate machines where, they're working in quarries. They're designed to be on contractor sites and just made simple for use.
Perfect. Okay, Alistair, mobile crushers. What the heck do you deal with?
Yeah, I think just echoing a lot of what Liam said, just on a larger scale. So, I mean, as I said earlier, we're in that roughly 30 to 75 ton range, which is very, wide in its own right, but it's predominantly for contractors these days. I think, there's so many different types of portable track crushers on the market, from jaws to impactors, VSIs to HSIs, gyratories, roll crushers, cones. But when we talk about C&D crushing specifically, I mean, our wheelhouse or in my last 20 years, it's been pretty much, jaw crushers and impact crushers being the mainstay for the majority of crushing. And that's not to say they're mutually exclusive. There are other crushers that can be used in there, but I find 99% of the time it's a jaw or an impactor. And probably these days it's more impactors. There's been huge shifts in the industries the last 20 years, and a lot of it's been driven by cost. The cost a contractor or a producer gets for his material, the cost of moving and dumping material when he's doing excavation or building works. And I think that led to the upsurge in C&D crushing in its own right. One of the biggest producers of recycling in North America in particular is the construction industry at this point, and that's because so much of what they do is trying to maintain their footprint on site. So, a lot of what we do and a lot of what the other competitors in the industry do in general is, produce large scale to medium scale crushing opportunities, equipment that can be deployed very quickly on site, set up very quickly on site, and can get to crushing immediately. So they can take raw, what was essentially for a long time waste product when they're doing construction demolition. They can now recycle it, crush it on down, and that product can be further used on site or could be sold on to another contractor or stockpiled for a future project. And I think it's great to see, I think, in this day and age. I mean, because our industry for the longest time was always seen as the gas guzzling monster, but so much of what we do is recycling at the purest sense of it as well.
Yeah, makes sense. So types of crushers. You said a jaw crusher, impact crusher. A jaw crusher. Why use a jaw crusher?
Yeah, very roughly, I suppose. So myself being a Puritan when it comes to when it comes to recycling, I would always opt for an impactor. But the way I find it, and the way I found over the last 20 years in installations and sales of equipment, is jaws are for primary material and contractors with a more basic need for crushing. They just need to take big rocks and turn them into little rocks. I think that was my first ever education in crushing and screening. Your first sales lesson was, we make little rocks out of big rocks. Now go sell them. But and I think that was the world of jaw crushing. So, for anyone who's not completely au fait with that, jaw crushing is essentially, taking material and squeezing it between two jaws and just reducing its size. So we're not trying to produce any material of specific sizing from it. We're just trying to take those big rocks and reduce them on down. And by that, it could be construction demolition waste, it could be concrete, it could be anything, reinforced concrete with rebar in it. And then from the other perspective, impact crushing. So now instead of squeezing material down, we're now trying to refine the product a little bit tighter. We're taking material and we're trying to create rock on rock crushing or rock on impact crushing. So it's impacting through the chamber and it's breaking on down. But now we have 2 or 3 aprons, trying to reduce that product down to a specific sizing. Of course, we don't finish with a finished product on there unless we use onboard screens, but that's the nice thing about both jaws and impactors. You've got the option of open circuit or closed circuit, and by that I mean with or without a screening section on the end of it. Again, Puritans, if it's going into quarries and mines, will tell you a standalone open circuit jaw or impactor for recycling along with a dedicated screen. But the industry is now 80%, if not more, predicated by contractors who have those same price constraints. So we're seeing a huge upsurge in closed circuit single piece recycling in the C&D industry, specifically with impactors at this point.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I've heard, the old days, let's say the 90s, isn't that crazy? We call that the old days. We always heard you had to have a jaw crusher ahead of an impactor, and you're right, Alistair. They have the industry has changed so much. You just look at the metallurgies of blow bars or the hammers that are in these impact crushers. The metallurgies are quite a bit different. You can even use like a medium type chrome with like a ceramic insert type hammer, and they last quite a lot longer than they used to. The old days, we always had probably a manganese type hammer, and they used to call them butter bars, right? So you'd throw, let's say, concrete or asphalt in that impactor, and they just melt down. So you'd have to flip the bars, let's say, every day, worst case scenario, or every other day at times. So, now the technology's changed. The metallurgies have gotten better. You'll see, like I've got some, instances and customers that don't flip the bars maybe for 3 or 4 months now. So kind of eliminated the jaw crusher, so now they can take a 26 inch, 30 inch piece and reduce it down to, hate to say it, like 1.5 inches or, in the base, probably not 100%, but pretty close. Unless they're going to close circuit, which means bring the oversized material back to the crusher and crush it down to whatever size you're making. So, it's been interesting, but, as far as, you talk about, so you're in the track industry more, they're flexible. I mean, you can take those pretty much anywhere, right? I mean, you deal with contractors. Do you deal with, I'm trying to, producers that are, I don't know, 300 tons an hour or less, or what is your market?
Yeah, I think if we were to talk tonnage is a very wide scale. It depends whether you're talking open circuit crushing or closed circuit, because closed circuit creates a constriction point for anyone who is in the crushing industry or spends entirely too long around these machines will understand what I mean by that as well. But, if you're in a closed circuit single pass application, your world is anything from 100 to 300 tons if you're doing well. It really is. I'm not a huge fan of quoting tonnage because it's such a variable. In our industry in particular, you have so many different viabilities that could change that tonnage at the end of the day. The product itself, the moisture that day, how well because you touched on a great point, preparation, how well the guy prepares the product. Or one I talk about a lot with my customers is reduction. the work they put into the preparation of the product, because jaws and impactors, I love to use the analogy. It's like I could take my Corvette and I can drive it off road for a month. After a month, it's going to be completely destroyed. But for that month, it will drive off road. It's the same with a jaw and impactor. You can put anything through them on day one, on day two, on day three, but then day 4, day 5, it starts to give you heartache. Especially with recycling work, because we get a lot of metal contaminations. You talked about the metallurgy of jaw bars and blow bars. I'm a huge fan of the versatility of blow bars and dies in particular, but I'll always come back to preparation, because the more you can avoid, the more you don't have to go for specialist metallurgies, technically, the more specialist you go, the more brittle you get, the more opportunity for breakages, but they're more expensive. So you want to have that work done at the front end. I find that will increase tonnage exponentially. My incredibly long-winded answer for you is, I don't like to quote a specific tonnage, but if I was, I'd say 100 to 300 ton window, very liberally.
Yeah, because you're right. The customer base, he may want 3/4 or 20 millimeter down, and maybe you don't ask that question. It gets you. So, because you're right, the smaller the material, the more effort it's going to take. It's going to stay in the chamber longer, so it's going to reduce your production level. It's a good point. So you talked about prep. What is that? How does that done?
Yeah, so way before you get to what you put in the crusher to get the big rocks in, the little rocks out, it comes down to you're looking at the base product you're putting into the crusher. As a very rough rule of thumb, when you're looking at a jaw crusher, you want to measure that top chamber and you want to say, right, I only want maximum size I want to put in it is 80% of the width of that chamber. But it doesn't stop there, because now what am I also looking to produce at my bottom size? And it's the exact same philosophy for impactors. What is my maximum size? What's my bottom size out? And that will tell me what my ratio is. And if I'm sitting with a 20-to-1 ratio, well, that's a problem, because I can crush that, but it's going to take forever to crush it. It's not going to be cost effective, and it's going to create huge wear. So again, I like to say, maximum I would like to see in an impactor is 10-to-1. Maximum I like to see in a jaw is 6-to-1. Will it do more? Yes. Should you be lower? Yes. So that brings in prep work. And by prep work, that means on your excavators or on your any of your loading equipment, pulverizers, breakers, anything that's going to take that core product down, just size it and break it down a little bit before it puts it into the chamber. That also allows you, as you're breaking, especially in the C&D industry, because we deal with a huge amount of concrete recycling. And the nature of concrete and structural engineering at the minute is they're all full of reinforced bar, rebar, as we call it, which, again, goes through crushers. Crushers don't like it, but it still goes through crushers. So the more time you take at the front end with those pulverizers and breakers, breaking that down, and any other large pieces of steel you see, just picking that out, you will always see so many more problems with that core material when you do your prep work before you even put it in. And that also means that it allows you to load the machine correctly. Just because you have a crusher with a massive hopper in it doesn't mean you bring a giant shovel and you load every last bit of that hopper immediately. You want to, and again, my opinion personally when it comes to crushing is I like to see an excavator feeding it always at the very back of the hopper, feeding from the very back of the hopper, allowing that material to miter in and allow it to get all of its time, either taking out the fines at the pre-screen before it gets into the chamber, or allowing that you've got a consistent feed going into there, so you can choke feed, or you can generate that consistency through your impactor to generate that rock on rock crush. So prep work. That's what I'm a huge fan of.
Yeah, I suppose, like you said, the steel, there's so many different, there's breakers, there's, call them munchers. They almost look like dinosaurs where they're munching things. They'll take and they'll actually shear the steel as well. So, you don't want an 8-foot, let's say a 3-meter long piece going through your impactor. What happens when you do things like that, Alistair, when you put that in a jaw crusher, let's say?
You have a bad day, Nick. I think that's the basic way to put it. So it depends. It depends on the size of the chamber and the throw of what's going through it. So you want, and again, it's all a specific science to when you're putting in materials. I mean, when you talked about a jaw in particular, in a jaw you want a certain amount of small, medium, and big rock going in there because that's what helps pull that material down. So when you're jaw crushing with that V shape, it's a gravity fed system. The material's coming in the top and it's getting pushed down. So we talk about choke feeders. We want to keep that chamber 2/3 to 3/4 filled at the top with a mixture of small, medium, and large material coming through because that'll help bring that material on down there. If you have one giant 8-foot chunk in there, so one of those bars, or sorry, one of the plates is static while one of them's moving on a rotation. So a very fast elliptical that you see, probably anything from 250 to 350 RPM rotating on through there is just helping you pull that material on down. But if you just end up with one big chunk, she's either going to sit there and burp the material, and by that I mean each time that she's trying to pull it down, keep knocking it up, and we just don't get the material through. If by chance she does start to break it down and she gets on through, you don't know in an 8-foot piece of material if there's a giant 8-foot piece of rebar in there or anything that's in there either, that when you get it down through the chamber, the reality is with tracked portable equipment, you have constriction points, you have tighter spacing. It's not a big static piece, which I know you'll talk about later, where when you've got all the space in the world, quarries and mines will use huge static setups, that you've got that forgiveness. And forgiveness, I mean that when it comes out the bottom of the chamber, before it connects with the main conveyor taking the material away, we have smaller spacing. So an 8-foot piece of rebar is going to give you that bad day I just talked about because it's going to get caught up in there. It's going to get rolled up in there. It's going to create blockage. And, unfortunately, when you get with, the size of crushers we deal with, blockage usually means, hundreds of pounds, if not thousands of pounds of material blockage, ergo a bad day. So,
yeah, a bad day. Okay. Liam, what is there's got to be more than digging on a crusher. When you throw a long piece of steel through a crusher, especially a self-contained plant where you've got maybe some conveyors or something underneath that crusher, what happens when you throw that long piece in there that they didn't prep?
Yeah, that's just going to get stuck on the belt, and you're going to end up ripping the belt.
So you'll have a couple belts.
Yeah, you're going to have a bad day with that.
I think. How about sticky material? Liam, is that good in a jaw crusher? Like let's say asphalt or something like that, or a washout material if it's real sticky. Is that good with the jaw crusher?
No, not sticky material, because the jaw, it's just going to chomp it up and it's just going to bind up in there, and you're just going to reduce your crushing area and it's just going to block it up. So sticky materials in the jaw crusher don't particularly go.
Okay. Yeah, in my experience with impactors, because I'm with the old company Universal Engineering, that's where I started really my crushing career, and they were known heavily. They were jaw crushers, but very, very popular in impact crushers. And the real benefit of an impact crusher, barring the wear side, we'll talk about that later, but is just what it is. It impacts. So what we're trying to do with concrete or even asphalt or whatever it might be in recycle, we're just trying to separate the material, right? So we're not actually really crushing the rock. We're just trying to separate the rock from the binding material, right? So that impact blows it up, and it probably does a little better than a jaw crusher. And what I've seen in my experience is you put, let's say, rebar or wire mesh or something like that that's holding that material together on the road or side, whatever it is, on sidewalk. The steel, if you hit it with an impactor, it looks like the chunks won't stay on that material like a jaw crusher, because the jaw is just simply squeezing it, breaking it. And you'll see, chunks of material still embedded on that steel. And ultimately the steel is a recycle portion of what we're doing too. So we call scrap steel. So we can reuse that. Anyway, so both work a little differently on that sort of application than the other one. So hope that makes sense. But anyways, my turn. Let's move into something big. So what I deal with a lot of the times is stationary crushers, and, I deal with, let's move back to portables. I deal with portables too. Alistair and Liam are self-contained track type crushing equipment. Now, another portable is what we call a wheeled type of a chassis, a wheeled chassis is what I'm talking about. So you can actually hook a truck, a semi-truck to it and pull it from site to site. Now, there's some work to set it up and tear it down, but it's much bigger. It's going to be anywhere from, you talk tons per hour, anywhere from, let's say, 300 to 500 or more tons an hour. And again, that's, let's call it a primary. So that's making us like a 6-inch or 4-inch material. So it's a bigger machine, and it's heavy too. So a lot of permits are needed to move them around, but their transitions are going to be maybe a little more open. And then you get into the stationary, that's a whole nother level, or static. Some people call it static. So now you've got structures, you've got, bigger crushers, screens, multiple screens throughout the whole process. And these are more for the large scale, 500 plus a ton per hour, stuff like that. So, the nice thing about a stationary is your costs are a little more fixed. You kind of know because these won't typically have an engine that power everything or a power unit. They'll typically be a plug-in, electrical plug-in. So you kind of know what your electrical costs are going to be month to month. And wear costs, you're going to have a consistent material because you're not moving site to site where everything can change. Let's say you're in the Midwest, you're crushing concrete, that's probably going to be somewhat less abrasive than if, Alistair, he's got machines that are going to New York or, it could be somewhere in the UK where there's granite that's the parent metal. So that is a little more predictable when it comes to a stationary because you're not moving them around. But there's a downfall to everything, right? So stationary, you've got to have it engineered. You've got to have your structures engineered. You can't move them. So you have to have the material come to that plant. And you need a crew to basically maintain that whole that system as well. So everything has its goods and it also has its drawbacks too. So I hope I answered that. We'll see. Any questions from you guys or any insight on stationaries?
Yeah, I think just from my perspective, I think you hit the nail on the head, Nick. I think it's there's benefits and drawbacks to all three of the variations. I think it really comes down to invariably the guy that's going to be operating at the company that's utilizing the piece of equipment, depending on A, his tonnage needs, B, his versatility needs, and C, ultimately his costs. And I think, and one I really want to touch on is manpower limitations. I think we've seen so much more advances in this equipment with single pass equipment, with the small contractor size that Liam does, just because of A, the cost of manpower in general, and B, the limitations of specialized manpower involved in it. So I think that will continue to be the driving force that grows this industry.
So we have the manpower is much different than it used to be. The specialization, if you want to call it that. What is there anything we could do as a manufacturer or the industry? What can we do to kind of get around that? Any ideas?
From my perspective, I think we deal predominantly in the hydraulic sector. That's not to say that we're mutually exclusive with diesel hydraulic equipment. We also have dual power options there as well. But if you would say 99% of equipment is diesel hydraulic, dual power is a little bit of a misnomer. A lot of governments push for environmental specs, and I think there's a few. If you're dealing with an environmental job, there's always a potential it's going to be a dual power or environmental contract with a municipal contract. There's a chance it would be dual power, but I still find the mainstay is diesel hydraulic and will continue to be for a long time. And the challenge with that is with more and more legislation on emissions, engines have been forced from their iterations of mechanical gubbins. So essentially that means that the throttle system was just a basic throttle increase, decrease that you would have seen on tier 3 engines and tier 2 engines all the way up through tier 4. to where we currently sit with stage 5. And what that basically means is now engines that come with AdBlue and diff systems. So keeping it basic and simple, essentially systems that take out as much of the contamination on the exhaust as they can. But what that means is they're all electronic. So electronic gubbins, electronic after treatment systems, which creates its own challenges and creates its own challenges from a maintenance point of view, because whilst you have all of that set up in your nice fancy Corvette we talked about earlier on, your Corvette does not work in a crappy environment all day with dust and heat and contamination. A lot of our equipment does. So, again, from my own personal perspective, I think our industry, we've had to evolve massively in terms of our sophistication of our equipment in electronics and sensors and everything else. But personally, I like to see simple hydraulics over electrics, avoid going too heavy on electrics, maintain that 12 volt, that 24 volt electric systems, because it allows for, more hands to be involved in maintaining that equipment on a daily basis. And I'm a big advocate of preventative maintenance. And if you create equipment that takes specialist maintenance, you take away the customer's desire to want to carry out preventative maintenance because they just don't have all that technology to hand.
Yeah. What about Liam? What about controls? Can we adapt the machine to the user? Like, because a lot of these guys are not trained, right? They just they're thrown into it. They may have a supervisor or something. I don't know. Is there something we can do on the control side to assist?
Yeah, I'm just going to circle back a bit on what Alistair was saying. The compact equipment is typically below 55 kilowatt power engine or 75 horsepower. So at the minute, we're not having to implement DEF systems on the engines, on the equipment, which makes it a much simpler machine for the guys on site to maintain and, keep going. The electrics aren't there that's required for the DEF system. So that's one thing that's helping the compact machines at the minute. On the control side, because they are a smaller machine, a lot of the functions around what Alistair's saying around these circuit conveyors and all things like that, they're just not there on the compact equipment at the moment. So they are a much simpler, easier machine to operate and to maintain.
Yeah. From my perspective on, let's say, technology is, the aggregate market, you'll see the big cement plants or just big aggregate producers, they'll have very automated systems. So I have a feeling that's going to get more and more popular as our labor skills reduce, I suppose. We'll have to tailor our operations systems, which, maybe control the crusher. You can maybe have a sensor that controls like the feed going to the crusher so you don't overfeed or underfeed or something like that. And who knows, maybe adjustments to the crushers, or if you have a blockage or something, maybe cameras, just to monitor that, or if there's a stoppage with maybe a belt scale, it sees a big drop, it'll shut certain sections off of the plant. Who knows? But another thing I thought about are magnets. Is that a good thing to have in our in our systems? Do you have magnets in your system, Liam?
Yeah, so we do. Yeah. So after the jaw crusher, we have either an overband magnet or a magnetic head pulley. Again, because we do get contractors crushing concrete with rebar in. So once that rebar, if it does make it round through the belt, it does get picked up afterwards and separated from that crushed material.
Well, you said magnetic head pulleys. Are there other types of magnets available?
So head pulleys and overband magnets. So the overband magnet is mounted over the discharge conveyor, and that just rotates constantly with a magnetic field and picks up the rebar and chucks it out. And then the magnetic head drum, that just grabs the material as it comes around the head conveyor and pulls it back down. Again, just separated from the crushed material.
It's probably pretty important. Let's say you're making a base material.
Yeah.
Do you want to have steel in that material?
No,
is that a good idea?
Yeah, you want to get that steel material out of there. So yeah, it's a good thing to have on there. If you're a contractor and you're working with rebar, it's essential really to have that on there to get it all out.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic because recycling, man, you could do so much, right? So you can make a base, and what I refer to as a base is like, depending on the state. And I'm in the North America market, so every state kind of has their own rule, right? So you've got, let's call base. I know what Iowa is like 1.5 inches minus, with some of the 200 or the real fine materials out of it. So you have to hit a certain band of the 200. And then if you look at like Minnesota, they're like, I think they're a 3/4 inch down. So in a lot of the states here in the U.S., especially with concrete and asphalt, we can reuse a portion of that. So it can range to like 30 to 40%. We can put back into the base material to when we're constructing roads. Alistair, is that something they do worldwide, or
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct, Nick. I think every country, every state has its different sort of requirements of what those base components need to look at, along with what the reutilization of recycled materials is, that percentage. I mean, like, we talked about asphalt there. I've seen it anywhere from 13 to 18% reutilization, and by that I mean, so when you produce asphalt, it's very oil rich. It's a very oil rich process. So recycling that down, crushing that asphalt on down to a sizable product, and mixing that into new asphalt and utilizing it, you're not just getting to recycle the product, but you're saving on your oil needs for the next set of asphalt millings that have been created. A lot of it's dictated purely by what resources are in each state or in each country. That determines the percentage used, but also the sizing of material used on your RCAs, your road base, all the way up. But yeah, I mean, it's as I said. I mean, one of the statistics I read recently was the construction industry. It takes us almost 70% of the country's recycling and reusable asphalt and concretes for utilization. I think that's just a huge statistic, just in terms of how much recycling is going on. And I think that's purely because of cost benefits, not having to take material off site, but also manpower limitations, and even down from an environmental perspective, landfill limitations. Recycling this. I think that's why we've seen over the last number of years, tipping costs, dumping costs continue to escalate, just because there's limited resources and where you put it if you're not going to recycle it. So there's so many incentive schemes now about recycling, and actually not just incentive schemes, but you find on a lot of new construction sites, at a state level or a government level, they're putting in a requirement for X percentage of recycling to occur on site. So I think contractors are getting much smarter on what they need to do, but how they do it cost effectively. Because unfortunately in this industry, where all these restrictions and DEFs and all this crap comes along, it doesn't suddenly change the cost per ton on the material that the producer is actually getting on his material. So he's got to get smart in how he reutilizes it on his major contracts, so he can A, save money, and B, make money.
There's just so many different aspects of recycle. Like I said, we talked about like slag operations. I was just at a slag operation this week, and we've got a number of crushers throughout the country here that are in those sort of operations. Very interesting. It's a process where they're making whatever they're making in the process, heating up in a furnace. And, you can picture this cauldron with this molten steel in there, and there's always the impurities coming off the top. And so they'll kind of scrape that off. And then, when they're done using that furnace, they'll clean that pot out, and there's impurities stuck to that. So they'll kind of stockpile that and then crush that down, and then recapture the steel or alloy or whatever it is. And then reuse it again. It's really interesting. I mean, this market has such potential. It's going. Where do you stop? I mean,
what was your PSI on that material, Nick? I'm assuming it was not nice.
Well, it's kind of funny. They were using impactors.
Really? Oh gosh.
And it was aluminum. So yeah, okay. I mean, so you talk about cost per ton. And it can be higher. I guess, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say the customers, some really care about the cost per ton, but others, they see the end result and they know the profitability there, and the cost per ton is really nothing. when you look at that. So when they use impactors in this kind of abrasive material and it's got aluminum in it and they're running it through two impactors, yeesh, there's some high maintenance there and high cost per ton because, you get a chunk of aluminum going through a impactor, not really able to be picked up by a magnet. That can cause some damage. It was interesting because I got to go out into their boneyard and they had a couple rotors that they've gone through.
Yeah, and that's where your spectrum of the industry really excels, getting into the static and the semi-static side of things. Because on the contractor side, certainly from Liam's side and our side, our world is like 35,000 psi down. Are there crushers that will do slightly more than that? Yes. Do you want to be putting them into those applications all day long? No. Your world is very much denominated on a more sort of medium to hard level rock. You don't go into hard rock or slag or materials. But I'm always amazed that this industry has such diversity that you could see people pulling out 55,000 psi crush and yes, beating the crap out of their wear costs, but still getting the product down at the end of the day.
They're still making money. Yeah. I mean, if they would have asked me, I would have probably steered them away. This has been a plant that's been there, I think, since 2018 in Kentucky. So they told me what they had for equipment. I just cringed. Okay. And then they took me back to see all the dead, we call it the boneyard, but that's where all the carnage is taking place. It's pretty nasty. But anyway, but it works for them. Typically I'd have said, go to a jaw crusher and then maybe an impactor from there, but because that's what we usually have seen. But hey, whatever works. But yeah, you said PSI. I think this is, aluminum. So it's got to be in the 40, 50 range, 1,000 PSI. So interesting. Yeah, that's, usually an impactor. We talk about PSIs. We like to see somewhere like a limestone type of a system. So anyway, what do you think trends in the future? What do you think, what are you seeing currently? I mean, we just talked about the different industries, but you
want to lead on with that one, Liam, and then I'll tell you my thoughts, my friend.
You didn't see coming like 5 years ago?
I mean, from our side, like the shift in compact C&D recycling has changed so much over the last few years, just because, the rise in materials, labor, transport, all the things we've mentioned previously. Now, like these smaller job sites where typically they would just dump material, get it away, it's now costing them more to do that. And where a compact crusher can sit in, like you don't need an awful lot of material to get a compact crusher in there to make huge savings across the year of your operations. Typically these contractors are working on multiple sites, multiple times, so a little saving on each site over the year adds up. And I think now contractors are starting to see that.
Okay. How about you, Alistair?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's over the last few years. I think it's been slowly ebbing in over the last 20 years, just increasing. And I just wanted to make a point. When you mentioned 1990, I saw a funny quip the other day where it said 1990 to 2025, because 1990 doesn't sound that far away, is the same as 1955 to 1990. And you're like, well, Jesus, that's really a long time. But, because this is our generation, we're like, 1990 is not so bad. I remember I was at school. I remember I was a few years away from graduating. So, it was just a different world. But now I thought that was such a great analogy, because we look at time very linearly in our own lifetime. But when you look at it as a base further down, it scares the crap out of you. But when I'm talking of trends in the last 10 years, I think two major things that I've seen change is there's more pressure than ever on contractors from a price point of view to remain competitive. And that's because, every man and their dog now has a crusher, because, there was so many people that saw the benefit of doing their own crushing on site and their own utilization and because of the super portable nature of them, it used to be that you looked for a site where you wanted at least 10,000 tons up, if I use a very rough scale, to validate going and using a going and using a tracked crusher. Now you see guys doing 3,000 to 5,000 ton piles up and just moving from site to site. But again, that cost value hasn't gone up, the value proposition and what they get for their cost per ton. So guys have to be super clever with how they move equipment and super portable. And I think that's led, again, as I love to give you long-winded answers to everything, I think that's led to the Puritan view being a separate crusher and a separate tracked screen to do recycling, now to more and more crushers with their own onboard screens. And that's forced manufacturers to get really innovative with how big a screen can they get, how many decks can they get on a screen, still keeping it within an envelope that it's transportable. And that's occurred because the cost of transport has got so expensive over the last decade. The amount of transport trucks, the cost of fuel movements, and then the cost of permits and everything that comes along with moving these super portable pieces of equipment from A to B to C to D quickly and efficiently, so that the guy's still making money. Because there's no point have a quickly deployable piece of equipment that could be set up very quickly if you have roadblocks to success. So I find that, and as it continues to go on, I think you will see more and more movement towards closed circuit, crushing. Impactors lead the way with closed circuit crushing. Cones are coming very quickly behind them. Jaws, you wouldn't have seen a lot of closed circuit. Now you're seeing more and more in them. And specifically, you're seeing them all deployed into more and more recycling applications. I think in particular, recycling is just exploding in the last 5 years. I think, this consistent regeneration and need for more building on top of it. There's limited resources. I mean, gosh, you only have to listen to the news to consistently hear about everything's running out, we're all going to die. So there's more and more emphasis on having to recycle and reuse. There's more government incentives to encourage reutilization and recycling. So I think that as we continue, you're just going to see more and more trending towards, crushing, and specifically closed circuit crushing, being used in those C&D and recycling markets.
Well, the question is, that's interesting you said, because you look at let's call it the rock poor areas, right? So like the sand and gravel, where they don't really have a lot of limestone. Is that I kind of look at it like the different states that have the sand and gravel. It seems that this recycled materials are like gold out there, because there's savings in over aggregate. You don't have to truck the aggregate, let's say, in. You have this hard abrasive round rock that takes more effort to crush, and you have a lot more fines too. So a lot of waste. So I really see this recycled concrete or even the asphalt really, taking its place. And different. So I know you can make different sizes of material, but can you identify, like, if we know base, are there other types of materials that we can use with, let's say, these concrete or asphalt or any of this stuff? What can we make with it?
Yeah, I think the opportunities are endless, I think, is the best way to put it, Nick. It really depends on what you're putting in and what you're looking to take out and what sizing you're looking to take out of it. I mean, when you go to any job site, and you look at everything from, let's say they were going to, for argument's sake, an urban site where they're rebuilding, 1,000 houses, for argument's sake, or they're building 1,000 houses on site, and you look at all the different types of material that gets utilized on that site, all the way down from pea gravel for all the pipe work, all the way out to fill for the driveways, all the way out to, your larger material for heavier roads that's coming on through as well. Because everything is scaled, and there's so many tight permits on everything, not permits, but so many tight specifications on the weight rates and everything that has to be used, and how much moisture has to move through the aggregate, or how much moisture has to move through the asphalt. That I think that's the whole beauty of crushing is you can take a 100% waste product and you can crush it down and screen it down to produce 3, 4, 5 different products and end up with 15% wastage. And it's fascinating to see, and I think it's only going to start getting higher and higher as we start to, eliminate those virgin deposits that we just don't have. And those states that don't have material, allows them to be productive by reutilizing material already in state as a C&D product.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many opportunities. Like even riprap. I had a customer asked, I want to make riprap from concrete. Okay, we can do that. For soil erosion, that's something that I've had to deal with, and like utility type material. I think you're right. I think it's endless. And when we've got building materials. That's kind of where we don't do well in, like wood and let's say like shingles, that sort of thing. That's a whole different sector of the world where they may use like a shredder or something like that. We don't get into that, but we more mirror kind of like the aggregate, if you want to call it that. So what do you think? Get your crystal balls out, or crystal ball out. Let's talk about the future. What do you think? The next 5 years?
That's awesome.
What do you anticipate? What do you see coming in the future? We talked a little bit about technology, but we know it's getting bigger. Do you think there's going to be more regulation? I don't know. I mean, is there going to be more scrutiny on the environmental side? Because depending on where you're at in the U.S., somebody the air quality, that's something we're talking about more and more. But when it comes to the runoff of the water, is that a concern in the future? Do you think that's going to get more popular?
Yeah, again, from my side, Nick, I think I think the generalized term is there's going to be a growing need for all sizes of crushers. I think because there's so many variations. I mean, when you consider like what are the considerations you need when you're choosing a crusher? I mean, you're looking at, what is my footprint available to me? What is my guy? And one of my favorite ones, the first question I ask every customer is, because everyone comes to you and wants to produce 300 tons an hour. And it's like, okay, what are you feeding it with? What is your in feed? What is your material and how are you feeding it? I mean, I heard a statistic recently, like the best-selling sizes of buckets in North America. If you take all of the major brands, Komatsu, Caterpillar, John Deere, Volvo, yes, they all have everything all the way up to 13, 14 yards and bigger, but 3 yard, 4 yard, 5 yard makes up like 80, 90% of sales on a volume perspective, which means unless it's got nitrous oxide in there, your world is like 150 to 250 tons an hour of in-feed. So I think it's understanding the customer, understanding the material, and then understanding his budget. Because all of those considerations will determine what he's going to need, whether it's going to be a Liam-sized machine, whether it's going to be an Alistair-sized machine, or whether it's going to be a static setup. Does he have permittation? Does he have a water requirement? Does he have permits and environmental legislation to suit water? And by water, I mean misting, stopping any of that. Because if it's in an urban site, you could have considerations where they're not allowed to have contamination. Because when we talk about all of those contaminants, it's not just from the fuel emissions, it's also from the dust emissions, and legislation is very tight on a lot of this. But I think as a very general term, I think the latest compound annual growth rate that I saw back in 2024, right through to 2031, they thought was going to be at least 5 to 6% growth year on year of mobile tracked crushers. And they said that as a very generic term because it's all the way down from those 5 tons all the way up to those 100-ton places. But I think, if we looked at North America from my perspective, or the world market, North America was close to 1,000 crushers per year sold. And it'd be fair to say that at least, and I'm being very conservative, saying at least 50% of them go into C&D recycling. I would say it's whoppingly more than 50%, if I'm honest. But if we rotate out that 5%, I mean, that means in the next 5 to 20 years, you're going to be anywhere from 1,600 pieces to 2,500 pieces. The need is overwhelming, and that's because we have limitations on natural resources, and we have more and more demand to recycle and refurbish our C&D product, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you. I think that's the future of North America is definitely, in my opinion, it's going to get bigger. The UK is or Europe has been in recycling forever, right? And I think we're just going to follow that. And, we have a whole another arm of our company too, where it's on the wet side. That's, Neil Mullen's thing. So, and that's not new, but it's kind of new to North America. The crushing part of things, man, that's been around since the probably late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there. But I think you're right, Alistair. It's just going to get bigger.
I think people get too concerned with what's happening at a micro level, and they don't think at a macro level. I mean, so right now everyone's like, the world's going to crap because we've got tariffs, we've got everything occurring. What are we going to do with stuff? But I think much like McLaren, Anaconda, and Rubble Crusher, we all work on a global platform. We're all selling across all 6 continents, so it really, one person's down is another person's up. Like I was chatting to the Australian, counterparts the other day, our distributors over there, and they were saying the tariffs are great for them because what it does is it increases, Chinese demand for products out of Australia, So I think we have these ebbs and flows at a micro level. But in overall, when we look at this market, it's a continual upward trajectory and will continue to be for the long term. I think we're just going to see more and more demand for this product, more and more requirement for recycling, and less core virgin product. So we're going to have to continue down this road. And I think from our perspective, it's going to be simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. Whilst we get further along and more roadblocks to success with requirements on engines and everything else and safety parameters, which are all incredibly important, maintaining a level of simplicity. And you mentioned a point that I just wanted to finish with there, as those you talked about, automation of systems. That's why I'm a huge fan of telematics. Telematics, for the benefit of everyone, is a way in which you can dial into the machine essentially from anywhere in the world and be watching what's it producing, what issues is it creating. And that helps with that preventative maintenance from a perspective that manufacturers are also able to see, are they running efficiently, help them with their efficiencies. Are they, down to simple levels with, you talked about cameras and belt scales and everything else. Where are we seeing constriction points? How can we help you be a better producer? How can we help your machine be more efficient? How can we minimize wear for you? So I think in the future, there'll be more and more of that type of assistance from manufacturers coming to play.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we talked about the limitations of the labor force, and I think it's just natural. It's going to go to more sensors, to more cameras, and safety as well is a big concern. So it can be it's a tough environment, this recycling, because you've got steel flying everywhere, you've got rocks and dust, and I mean, how about autonomous? Is that something that's in your bailiwick, I guess, in the future? How about you, Liam? How about autonomous? Is that ever crossed your mind?
I think we're way off that in the compact market just right now. But
I think when Elon Musk figures out the driverless car, we'll figure out the driverless crusher. But I think we're a little bit away from that yet, Nick.
Yeah. Let's move to the controls first, and then we'll see what happens from there. Right? I don't know. It's a different world. I mean, they're running these huge trucks autonomously now, and it seems to be working. I don't know if I'm going to get in the way, but anyway. So let's talk about how about a little sales pitch, Liam, on Rubble Crusher? What kind of good stuff can you tell the people out there about Rubble Crusher?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, like our background was heavy duty crushing and screening equipment. That was our base, that was our core. We were a service company as well. Now working as part of in the McClanahan group, we've got all this experience now that we're drawing from heavy duty equipment that we're now shrinking down to a compact piece of equipment that contractors can use and keep it simple, but it's going to be reliable, it's going to keep you going.
Yeah. Perfect. Alistair, how about you?
Is my sales pitch allowed to be a little bit longer than Liam's?
I'm going to give you 20 minutes. That's all we have.
No, I better start talking real fast then. Yeah, no. So Anaconda, essentially, we've been on the market now for coming on close to 20 years. Initially started with compact screens, conveyors, trommels, scalping screens, and then part of the onus of the relationship with McClanahan was getting into crushing in 2019. We've been in crushing since 2020 when the zombie apocalypse hit. Our first crusher was launched the same week as the world closed, so it was an epic journey. But what the reason that was such an important, vital relationship was, I'm a big believer in when you go to a level of sophistication with crushers, which are 3-4 times the pricing on screens and conveyors, it's fundamentally important that you have strong industry-proven chambers. McClanahan, ergo, owned the Universal Crushers brand, 140 years of legacy history, 7,000 impactors, 1,500 jaws installed, working around the world, some of them still today. I think that gave us a great launch pad when we moved into crushing. And we've continued to evolve that product. We have, small, medium, and large jaws, impactors, cones. We continue to design new products, new crushers, new innovations, and to sort of formulate our relationships with our dealers. As a younger brand, I think what's core important to us is, generic parts, generic components, but as opposed to the push-pull relationship you see with a lot of corporations and dealers today, just very much a partnership with our people, partnership with our dealers on the ground together, dealing with the heartache, dealing with the successes, and just sort of working on that journey together. So that's my 20-minute answer condensed for you, my friend.
Oh, that was really, I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. Nice job.
I held back.
I can tell. I mean, I couldn't tell it by the picture, but I could hear you at least. No, just to throw something in there, McClanahan is really cool if you think about it. The history of the company is really amazing. I heard, I think we're celebrating our 190th birthday. I want to say it's next week, 1835. Man, so I'm from Iowa. That's where I'm talking to you, in the bunker of Iowa. No, it's not a bunker. It's in the office here, but it's older than Iowa. That's amazing. So anyways, I'm pretty excited. I mean, it's a great sixth generation. It is now with Sean McClanahan. And, you think about everything that the company's gone through. It's just mind boggling. And then, all the experience, if you go through the employee roster here, there's so many people with 20 to 30 years of experience with just this company, so they really know the machines, I should say the equipment, what its limitations are, what it can do, what to recommend. We truly have experts in the industry, and that's not a lot of companies can say that. That's really
I think you'd be hard pressed to find a company that's 190 years old in a country that's only 250 years old. I think that's an important statement. I think originally from the UK before I moved to the States, we have hundreds and hundreds of years of history. I mean, it's pretty amazing that to have a 190-year-old family-owned company that is still family-owned, that hasn't been sold and consolidated or floats on the stock market. I think it's very unique, and it creates a very unique relationship with customers as a result. And I think I would urge everyone, if they're ever looking at it, go through McClanahan's history online and look at how many patents they created in this industry. I mean, they really are the grandfathers of a lot of washing and crushing. And again, from such a young country in the grand scale of things, I think it's an important piece that needs to be pushed out there. And I think it's exciting to be part of that as well. And we're certainly grateful to bolt onto that and be the red-haired stepchild, so to put it.
Well, and another thing
is that you, Liam? Since you still
that
have
might be us.
That's Liam. Yeah. I think he's got red hair, so that's automatically him. No, something else I thought about while you were mentioning that, Alistair, is we're old, but we don't always have old thinking. I work with engineers every day, and I'm sure you guys do too. Where can we go, in the future? We're working on things that are industry leading and revolutionary. So there's a lot of interesting ideas that we're working with. So I just don't see this ever stopping, so I'm really excited about where this company's going, and especially with C&D, who knows what the limit is for that. Anyway, keep rambling. Sorry. I'm going to have to end this thing. We've been doing this forever. You guys have anything else you want to throw in?
Too much, so we'll leave it there, my friend.
Liam, you just keep talking.
I know, yeah. Just can't help it.
Shut up, Liam. We're done now. Okay. Well, thanks again, guys. We've had a really interesting discussion. Really enjoyed it. Who knows? Maybe we'll do it again. Looking forward to it. And just want to thank everybody for listening to Groundwork. It's a McClanahan podcast. Be sure to follow your favorite listening app for new episodes, and definitely check us out on social media for more content. So again, thank you, and look forward to meeting up with you again in the future. Take care, guys.
Appreciate it, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.